on the House Intelligence Committee, we would refer those to the House Intelligence Committee.
The White House has continually said that any discussion about coordination between the Trump campaign and Russian officials is a hoax. Anybody who's seen any information about this knows that there's nothing there. So from what you have seen so far, can you definitively rule out that there was no coordination whatsoever between Trump officials and Russian officials during the election?
Man, we would be crazy to try to draw conclusions from where we are in the investigation. I think Mark and I have committed to let this process go through before we form any opinions. And I would hope that that's what you would like us to do. As much as we'd like to share minute by minute, even the snapshots we get as a team going through it are not always accurate when we find the next piece of intelligence. So let us get a little deeper into this before you ask us to write the conclusions. That's clearly something we intend to do down the road.
Chairman?
All the way in the back real quick.
Senator Wyden today sent a letter to both you and Senator Warner urging the committee to look closer to financial ties between Trump associates and Russia. Is there a sense that the committee is not already investigating the financial aspect of this closely enough?
I think the committee's looking anywhere intelligence suggests that there might have been any type of relationship or effort to influence U.S. elections.
And I just simply add that, I, for a long time before we even started the investigation, have believed that this president, like all prior presidential candidates of both parties, should have, in the best interest of the American people, release their tax returns.
Kelly?
Chairman, is Christopher Steele among the 20 that you've identified? And if necessary, does your committee have the reach and the resources to interview persons outside the United States if you deem that?
Well, we're not going to get into names that are on our list, but I can assure you that it's lengthy. Mark and I have both agreed that we're willing to issue subpoenas. It's tough to make a subpoena go outside of the United States, so we understand the limitations. But I'll only say this, that he and I are tapping into everything that we can to understand how we increase our reach in the ability to investigate and to get intelligence that would be pertinent to the investigation.
Good answer.
Senator Burke, have you personally coordinated with the White House at all on the scope of this investigation? And how do you prevent it from going off track?
No, sir, I have not. And it's the relationship and the trust we have.
And let me just also add to that. There have been, all the members of the committee, I have been constantly impressed. And we know it's challenging. Some folks want this to go away. Some folks want this to be done and us reaching conclusions tomorrow or yesterday. But so many committee members on both sides of the aisle have constantly stepped up. So I think it's not only our relationship, but it's the fact that the committee, I think, has got our back and they want to see it through.
Mr. Chairman,
I heard there. Yes.
without naming another committee, could you speak to the level of satisfaction on both sides of the aisle within your committee about the integrity of the committee, how it's working, its functions, and so on?
Well, I think the first assessment I would make is that not only for the first time have our members had access to Gang of Eight information, 7 of our professional staff slots have access to Gang of Eight information. That is unprecedented in the history of the committee. And so I think it starts with the trust that the intelligence community has with the staff, the professional staff, and with the membership at large. It would be extremely easy for them to deny us to have access to some of the country's most sensitive things that deal with sources and methods. They have not. And I think that's what gives us high hopes that we can reach a conclusion that has bipartisan support and that we feel confident explored every crevice that we can find.
We are going to need to make sure we get all that information. Yeah. And, part of this is the normal course, I think, of the intelligence community having concerns, and I think we've earned their trust, but it continues this back and forth.
Senator, the two-part question. One is that Paul Manafort has written to the committee, and I understand his lawyers have been talking to your staff to try to set up his interview. Can you tell us whether that has happened already? And secondly, just from a logistical standpoint, we're hearing that people on your committee who go and read some of these documents at the CIA, for instance, it's a bewildering amount of information, and they don't even know where to begin, where it ends. Is there something being done to try to help you get through this large volume of information?
Listen, I'm not sure who you're hearing it from. It's not the professional staff that's doing it. Is it a lot of information? Absolutely. Is it clear to know where to go? Yeah, it's in 3 binders. You open the front cover and you start reading until you get to the back one, and then you work on the second and the third. In Benghazi, our professional staff had to go out and figure out what intelligence they needed to ask for, didn't have access to Gang of 8, had to figure out who to interview. And so I'm not going to tell you this one's easier. This one's one of the biggest investigations that the Hill has seen in my tenure here.
And just to add, the challenge at times is then you go to a footnote and you got to then go back and get a document that supports that footnote. So again, we want to do, you mentioned one individual, any of those individuals that are out in the public, we'll have to assess whether it's appropriate to see them. And you might think it will be appropriate, but we've got to we got to know what the right questions are to ask. And to do that, you got to have the underlying document.
That's not scheduled yet.
Not scheduled.
Senator Warner, in your remarks, you mentioned there are still challenges getting information from the IC. Are there particular agencies in particular that are moving slowly?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I'm going to not say, but I want to make sure the intelligence community knows some have been very responsive, some less so. But to do our job, we have to have this information.
And let me answer on behalf of the agencies. Not every document that an agency holds is the product of that agency. So it is impossible from a legal standpoint for one agency to provide us another agency's document. So the faster we can work through who has ownership rights, the quicker we can ask the appropriate agency for a specific document. Let me go right here.
As part of your investigation, are you asking the House Chairman to share his sources with you, and will you seek to review the White House visitor logs?
We're not asking the House to play any role in our investigation. We don't plan to play any role in their investigation.
For Senator Warner, are you confident that the White House has not interfered in the integrity of this investigation? And for both of you, is the ultimate aim to write a bipartisan report at the end of this investigation?
Let me start with the second part of your question. Absolutely, in terms of bipartisan. If we don't come to some joint conclusion with the manipulation that took place in the election and with the spirit of kind of the American people saying, what's going on here? I think we would not fulfill our duty. On the first question, I've seen no evidence. I think one of the things that Mr. Kushner volunteering to testify was a good sign, but I've said repeatedly, and I think the chairman agrees, this is the right venue, but if we see any attempt to stifle us with information or cut off the intelligence professionals giving us the access we need, you'll hear from us.
Down here.
David Smith of The Guardian. Can I ask, will you also be looking at the potential rewards Russia got for this, whether it's questions of changes to the Republican Party platform at the convention, or the way the president constantly refuses to criticize Vladimir Putin? Is that part of what you're looking at?
That's not in the scope of the investigation. I'll leave that up to you guys to report. Yes, ma'am.
Has the White House or the DOJ or any part of the Trump administration blocked Sally Yates from giving you guys information or coming before the committee?
I'd like to see Ms. Yates at some point. I did see her White House comment from the White House spokesman yesterday that he said that they'd be happy to have her testify. I know there may be some DOJ concerns, but again, that's something we have to jointly decide on and when the schedule would take place.
So they haven't blocked her from being or enabling her to come up before your committee or to talk to you?
No.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Byrd?
Yeah.
I think a lot of Americans want to know if the president himself had anything to do with this. I mean, we have a government. There's a trust issue right now. A lot of Americans. Is there anything that you've seen, either of you or your staff, that would raise any direct links to the president himself with what happened last year?
Again, we won't take a snapshot in time and make any observations on it, but we know that our challenge is to answer that question for the American people in our conclusions to this investigation.
I would concur with the Chairman.
Drucker?
Any circumstance with which you wouldn't share with Mr. Warner one of your sources of intelligence on this investigation?
He usually knows my sources before I do.
And let me assure you, I've also got his cell phone, which means he hears from me more than he sometimes like.
The White House and supporters of the president have complained at times that the intelligence community has leaked intelligence or communications scooped up by members of by Trump associates or members of the transition team improperly. Does the scope of the investigation include any of that?
The normal course of business for the Intelligence Committee is about leaks. So that's an ongoing process that we look at. We will try to assess leaks if they take place during the investigation in the same way. And if we find them, we will refer them to the appropriate law enforcement agency by requesting a crimes report.
Have you seen anything yet that would suggest that the intelligence community did anything improper with information that it collected that had to do with?
My answer would probably be no, but you know, we're so early in the investigation, I'm not sure that we've triaged every piece that's out there.
And I think one of the things we both are very concerned, because leaks can sometimes be extraordinarily damaging to our capacity and to the men and women who serve our country in the IC. I do think that, editorial comment here, that if the administration has said they did nothing, then I would hope they would continue. There's nothing to leak, but on the other hand, the more cooperation we can get, the sooner we can move forward and either get to the end or remove this cloud.
Over there.
Yeah, so the fact that the FBI has an active counterintelligence investigation, has that caused you to change your investigation at all in terms of trying not to step on their toes or to do anything that could undermine a potential criminal investigation?
I'll leave up to the FBI to make any comments on a CI investigation if there is one and the extent. But we're always conscious of the fact that we may go down a road and find that we're in conflict with a law enforcement process, at which time we will work with the appropriate people to try to remedy that.
But there is historical precedent, obviously.
Yeah.
Watergate had an investigation while there were DOJ investigations going on, but we're very sensitive. Yeah.
Senator Warner, can you give us a sense of the scale of what the Russians allegedly did in terms of the numbers of people and the different facets of the attack?
I'd like to, let me start off on that. I think we know about the hacking and the selective leaking of information. But as a former tech guy, what really concerns me is at least some reports, and we've got to get to the bottom of this, that there were upwards of 1,000 paid internet trolls working out of a facility in Russia, in effect taking over a series of computers, which are then called a botnet. They can then generate news down to specific areas. It's been reported to me, and we've got to find this out, whether they were able to, in effect, specific areas in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, where you would not have been receiving off of your whoever your vendor might have been, Trump versus Clinton during the waning days of the election, but instead Clinton is sick or Clinton is taking money from some source. Fake news. We've also seen as well the fact that if you look, just at, for example, if you Googled election hacking during the period leading up to the election and immediate afterwards, you wouldn't get Fox or ABC or New York Times. Or what you get is 4 out of the first 5 news stories that popped up were Russian propaganda. RT News, Sputnik, others. And again, let's be clear, I'm not here to relitigate the election. But the fact we have, I believe, part of our responsibility as well is to put the American public on a higher level of alert that this time it was Russia, it could be other foreign nations as well. We are in a whole new realm around cyber that provides opportunities, but huge, huge threats for basic democracy. And we're seeing it right now in France.
And we're on the brink of potentially having 2 European countries where Russia is the balance disruptor of their leadership. And what we might assess as a very covert effort in 2016 in the United States is a very overt effort as well as covert in Germany and France, already been tried in Montenegro and Netherlands. And so we feel part of our responsibility is to educate the rest of the world about what's going on, because it's now into character assassination of candidates.
And one of the things that we, I think as the committee working with the administration, how we really think proactively about what kind of even potentially offensive strategy you have to take. We cannot allow this to happen again. This last time it may have favored one party, it could favor, Russia's going to act in its self-interest, not in America's interest. And so we have to be careful in 2018 and obviously in 2020.
Thank you, Senator. Mary Louise Kelly, NPR. Question for you, Senator Burr, and I ask this with no disrespect, but because it's a question that's
He disrespects me all the time.
Having served as an advisor on the Trump campaign, can you say hand over heart that you can oversee an impartial and serious investigation?
Absolutely. I'll do something I've never done. I'll admit that I voted for him. We always hide who we vote for. That's part of the democratic process. But I've got a job in the United States Senate, and I take that job extremely serious. It overrides any personal beliefs that I have or loyalties that I might have. Mark and I might look at politics differently. We don't look at the responsibilities we have on the committee differently, and that's to earn the trust and the respect of the intelligence community so they feel open and good about sharing information with us, because that enables us to do our oversight job that much better.
And let me just hold that. I have confidence in Richard Burr that we, together with the members of our committee, are going to get to the bottom of this. And that's, if you get nothing else from today, take that statement to the bank.
Have you guys been in contact with Michael Flynn or Representative Michael Flynn? And also, can you go into a little bit of the thought process between why you would have an interview behind closed doors or do it publicly? Like why you would talk to Jared Kushner behind closed doors or you would do it publicly? Why you would do that?
Well, I think it's safe to say that we have had conversations with a lot of people. And you would think less of us if General Flynn wasn't in that list. From a standpoint of the interview process, if you feel like you're being cheated because they're not in public, if there's relevance to them, they will eventually be part of a public hearing. But any investigation of this kind will start with private interviews to determine the value of what a witness has to provide for the committee. One thing that we're really conscious of is we weren't given a free pass to do a witch hunt. We were asked to do a real investigation. And we'll see high-profile people, and we will see analysts from the intelligence community. Or we may see a 28-year-old that happened to answer the phone at the White House on the wrong day when an ambassador called him, and when they went around and said, who talked to the ambassador, they raised their hand. Mark and I don't want that person to have to get a lawyer to be interviewed. We'd like to bring them up and understand what role they played, if any, without any liability that extends to them. So we're really conscious of trying to assess each individual person for what the need is, but we don't rule anything out for anybody relative to how public the information might be.
Have you already spoken to Flynn?
I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. Yes, ma'am.
You said that you had requested interviews from 20 people and scheduled 5. But
Yes.
when did this actually start? Did you conduct any of them, or when did it start?
I think they start as early as next Monday, but I would probably be the wrong one to verify that. But they're immediate.
Sorry?
They are immediate.
And remember, these are the people who helped put together the January 6th report. Most of those fall into that category. And
you know what? When you see a movie, it's roughly 2 hours. When you see how much film went into a movie, it's probably 50 hours. We don't want to just look at what was in the report. We want to look what was cut and thrown on the floor, either an analytic product or an intelligence, to figure out whether an analyst made the right determination with what we know today. What we know today is a lot more than what they knew in December when they went through this process. Got time for a couple more right here.
You said you're looking at communications and connections with people involved with the Russian government. Are you also looking at people involved in organized crime in Russia and their contacts?
don't think we said anything about organized crime. We said anybody that had connections to the Russian government and contact with the campaign.
But unfortunately, many people in Russia who are part of organized crime networks seem to have ties to the Russian.
I'll let that one be attributed to him.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned a potential or concern for an attack during the 2018 election. So does this investigation need to be completed before then so you can better prevent?
We sure hope so.
Tomorrow's hearing is with specifically that in mind, that we provide more public awareness, not just in this country, but throughout the world, as to what Russia's up to. I think it's safe to say that U.S. officials have pushed what we know, not we the committee, what we the government knows about Russia's capabilities and intent. We've pushed it out to those countries that are most imminent to have elections. But I remind you that we're within 30 days of the first French election, 4 candidates. It will go down to 2 candidates with a runoff in May. I think it's safe by everybody's judgment that the Russians are actively involved in the French elections. Last one.
You mentioned earlier that your staffers, your professional staffers, have thousands of pages of documents to go through. Are they having to take notes by hand, or is there a similar setup to the Senate EIT program where they have sort of a shared drive where they can look at documents online?
I'm not going to be specific as to how we're doing it, but there is no shared drive this time around. That didn't have a happy ending. And so we're again, this gets back to what we said about every iteration is a new negotiation, and we're not complaining about that. We think it's really, really important that we have a clear understanding up front who has access, how do they treat the information that they've got, where do they store the information, who's responsible for the security of that information, because you've got to understand, we're going to go through an investigation that will last X amount of time. After that, we've got to perform our oversight job, which means we're going to be working with the same people, asking them for documents to do our normal oversight job. And if, in fact, we don't live up to the security that we promise them, then you're going to have an oversight committee that can't successfully do its job.
And one of the things we are doing, and this is where part of the rub comes, and I understand it, is that we're basically trying to get access that even goes beyond what the Gang of Eight has had, and in a sense how we have all of that in terms of raw products, and how we make sure that, again, every committee member has said they've got to see or know some of this information before they can sign their name on a finished product. So there's some healthy tension there, but we believe we'll work through it.
For any of you that have been at any of the confirmation hearings, one question you have heard of every person who was nominated and eventually confirmed is, would you provide for the committee, if asked, raw intelligence data? There is rarely a time where a committee would ask for that. We are in a very rare time, and we will test some people to see if, in fact, their commitment is 100% correct. Let me end with how we ended the first part, and that's that the committee will go wherever the intelligence leads us. You can continue to ask us 30 different ways about a person. Trust me, when we have them scheduled, we will tell you. You won't have to beat it out of us. We hope to make updates a periodic thing, but we're not going to do them unless we've got something to share with you that's educational, that shows you a little bit of the roadmap we're going down. It's just right now we're not at a point where we can tell you that's every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month. We want to do it based upon the changing conditions of the investigation.
My last comment is simply a comment I've made before. When we started this, and we saw the scope and what was involved, I said it was the most important thing I'd ever taken on in my public life. I believe that